in the previous video, if you've not watched that, there's a link to that. It's called Introduction to Solidity. So in this video, it's going to be about integers. Now, let me do a bit of writing here. So what do I mean by integers, right? So basically, integers in programming means numbers. So this is what it means. So when we say integers, we are simply referring to numbers. So in Solidity also, we, based on the contract we are trying to create here, which is the salary contract that helps you to like manage payment of salaries, right, for your staff. So in this case, we need to deal with numbers because you are dealing with money. And by definition, it simply means you're dealing with numbers, you're dealing with integers. So the first thing you notice here is in the previous video we did, this was basically everything we touched, right? And then you notice that at the end of the video, I mentioned this, but I didn't talk about it. So now we are going to talk about integers and what kind of integers do we have and how do we use numbers, right, in our code? Because a simple calculation like 2 plus 2 might be simple for a human. 2 plus 2 equal to 4. It's simple, we know. But for computers, it needs to, especially programming languages like Solidity, you need to specify what 2 is. This 2 here, you need to specify what this 2 is, and you need to specify the expected result as a number as well. So it means if I'm going to create something like that, I need to create something like this, public. I need to say first number equal to 2. I can duplicate this and say second number equal to 2. And then I'll create a result and call it result equal to something, right? I don't need to do that, but then I can also say result equals to 4. So by definition, you could see here that I am actually creating a type for each of the numbers in this case. So that is significant. Note that word type. So I'm going to write it here. Just note when we refer to as type in this case. Let's note that. So what's the first thing to note here? The first thing here, remember from the previous video, I said you will see a lot of blue colored words in your smart contract, and that simply means that what they are useful for the compiler. Remember that from the video. So if you've not seen the video, then you can check that video out, because this is just a continuation from the previous video, which I'll link in this video as well. So just feel free to check the card up above anywhere in this video to check that out. So let's go back to the integer section. So we talked about pragma, solidity, contract in the last video. Now we are talking about the uint type. Now, what does this uint mean? So what do you mean by uint? So remember I mentioned integers at the beginning of this. Let me reset this. At the beginning of this video, and I said integer simply means numbers. So when we talk about integers, we are simply referring to numbers. Now, remember also that numbers are of different types. We have real numbers, we have floating point numbers, okay, which is still real numbers. We have integers as well in mathematical terms, but in this case, just for layman definition, let's just say integers mean numbers for now. So basically, what this means is that this uint now is an integer type. Simply means that it is used to represent numbers. So like the example I gave now, if you want to represent 2 is a number, so you need to use a uint type. 2 is also a number, you need to use a uint type. 4 is also a number, you need to use a what? Uint type. So we are simply saying that, okay, whenever I'm trying to represent a number or accept a number in my contract, that means the type I'm using must be what? A uint type. It's that simple. Like, it's not something I need to dwell much on. But then one thing that will make me go further than this in this video is to explain to you the type of integers we have. So we have two types of integers basically in Solidity. We have the unsigned integers and we have the signed integers. Now, before I explain what this does, I would like to point out that remember that we can have numbers of this nature. Going back to the example I give, remember that we can also have negative numbers, right? If from the example we have 2 plus 2, then I show this representation, right? So we can also have something like 5 minus 2, which is equal to 3, right? Or I can have 2 minus 5, which is equal to minus 3 in this case, right? Both are valid. They are all numbers. Remember, they are all numbers. This is a number, 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 this is a number. They are all numbers. But the difference is that this is a positive number, this is a negative number. So how do you represent negative number and positive numbers? So Solidity gives us the ability to represent positive and negative numbers in different ways. What do I mean by that? The first thing is this. What I refer to as unsigned integers basically mean that it has no sign. What do I mean by sign? Remember that we used to say that, oh, positive and negative. Negative is a sign, right? Exactly. So if you remember that concept in early mathematics, in our like junior level, mathematics classes, you remember that when you say sign, you are simply referring to positive or negative, right? So unsigned integers are those integers without a sign. So any number, any integer without a sign is simply what? A positive integer. And that basically answers the question. So that is what we refer to as an unsigned integer. So when we talk about signed integers now, it's simply the opposite, right? So that means as a sign, right? So it means a positive or a negative. In this case, no positive, we don't refer positive like this is a positive 2, but we don't write positive, we just write it as 2. So that means signed integers are integers with negatives. In this case now, I'm just going to be using negative since you don't really represent positive, right? So we can say has no sign. So that means if you say unsigned integers, that means it doesn't have negative numbers. It can only be positive numbers. But signed integers means it can be positive or negative. Do you get it now? So in this case now, that means positive or negative, since that one comes in here. So that means it can either be positive or negative, be a positive or negative integer or number. So does that make sense? So when we refer to as unsigned integers, we are simply saying an integer that has, let me give this space here, a number or an integer that has no sign. So when I refer to as integer, no, I'm talking about numbers, right? That's why I wrote it here. Numbers and integers simply means we are referring to what? Integers, numbers, integers, numbers, integers. We can use it interchangeably. It still works. So unsigned integers means has no sign. That means a positive integer. Signed integers means it has a sign, positive or negative. That means it can either be positive or negative number, right? So let me leave this here just to avoid the confusion of having one place and not in the other. So this is what we mean. So now when you look at this, now we have this uint, right? Remember I said -3 is also a number, remember that. But how do we represent -3? Do we also write something like this? So if I want to represent -3 now, let me say negative number. Can I write something like this? Is it correct? Does it work? No. You can see that this is giving me an error automatically. It says what? The type int constant -3 is not implicitly convertible to expected type uint256. So what does this mean? All this story that you see here just now, what does it mean? It simply means this uint you see here simply means what? Unsigned integer. So that means unsigned integer was what? That means it must be a positive integer, right? It has no sign. So that means anyone that has a uint cannot have a negative sign. It can't have a sign at all. So what kind of variables can have a sign, or what kind of type in Solidity has a sign? We have to use the int type. And then you can see that this will not give an error. So what does this mean now? I'll just remove this because this gives error, right? And you can see that this does not give me an error. You can see it perfectly works, right? Why? Because I'm using a signed integer.
It's 18 hours.
Anytime you see the uint here, it simply means uint means what? Unsigned integers. Int means what? Signed integers. So that means the int can take, remember what I said here, it can take what? Positive or negative. But the unsigned does not take a positive or negative. So it means it can either be a positive or negative number or integer. So in this case now, if you want to represent negative numbers like this, like this, like 1 million minus 1 million or minus 110,000. It simply means what? You need to use the int type and not the uint type. Does that make sense? So that's simply what we refer to as integer types in Solidity. So we have these two types of integers in Solidity, or let me say number types or integer types. So let me read them as integers or numbers in Solidity. Basically, so now you understand that we have two types. We have the uint, which means what? It only accepts positive numbers, and that means any number that we give you negative, it will throw error. So integer simply means it takes both positive and negative numbers. So I can do this as well. Positive number 1, right? And say this is 500. Do you get it now? So it's still the same thing as plus this, but we don't write plus. Do you understand? So if I do this, you see that it's still correct. It's still correct. It's still the same thing as what is here. But because integers can take what? Remember from the definition, they can be either positive or negative. So that means if you use a positive number, it works. If you use a negative number, it works. But for uint type, it only takes what? Positive numbers. That's the clear difference. So whenever you see uint and int, we are simply referring to ability of a number to either take negative or does not take negative numbers. So that's simply what it means. So now to ask a question, a trivial question, so how do I represent 0? That's just like a question. So just take a moment to think about it before I give the answer. So which one works for 0? Can I use uint or int for 0? Right. So now let's try it out to see which one do you think will work. Just say it in your mind and see if you'll be correct or not. So let's say 0. So if I say this, is it correct? Yes. If I do this as well, is it correct? Let me say 0, 2. Yes. Why? Because remember that integers can take both positive and negative, and 0 is in between positive and negative. It's in between -1 and 1, so it's still valid. And uint can only take what? 0 and above. It can't go below 0. So this is still valid. So this is basically what we refer to as integers in Solidity. They are just numbers, but the numbers can be either positive or negative, and we have different keywords. You can see the blue colored keyword I was talking about in the previous video. So whenever you see this blue, it simply means that it is required by the compiler. It is a keyword. We call them keywords, right? So it is a keyword that the compiler understands what it does. So when we talk about integers, how do you represent integers? Because we are going to be using numbers a lot in this contract. What do we need? You will see us using a lot of uint and int across different code bases. This is simply what it means. Uint takes only positive numbers, zeros and positive numbers. Integers, this int type takes both negative, 0 and positive numbers. That's all. That's all you need to understand. So I hope you've understood this from this video. I hope you've learned something significant. If you have further questions, feel free to drop it in the comment in this video, and I really appreciate you dropping a like on this video so I know that yes, this is actually helping someone. And also feel free to subscribe to this video if you feel like it. Thank you so much for watching. Catch you guys in the next one. Bye for now.